What is up, Nerf Nation? I'm Naptown Nerf, and this is a new series called Tested. Today we're going to be testing the best setup for your worker Dominator. This is going to be a test of both two different types of two-stage setups, both with flywheels close together and separated with faux barrel in between as they are set up actually right now, and then a three-stage setup in the end. So we are going to test this over the chronograph and on a range to kind of give you an idea of how the darts fly and do a full test of all the different setups so you can decide for yourself what is the best way to set up your worker Dominator. So doing videos like this is something I really enjoy doing, although they are very expensive. So if you could please leave me a like if you enjoy this content, that would be greatly appreciated. And if you want to go one step further, support me on Patreon and help me make more videos like this one. So without further ado, let's take a look inside this thing and I'll show you how we are going to set it up. Alright, you guys, let's talk about what we got going on here. So I have this wired up as a normal strife style rewire. Now I will definitely be going to a MOSFET loom once I finalize the setup I want to run. So whether that be a two-stage or three-stage setup, I highly recommend using a MOSFET. But I don't want to wire it up now because depending on what setup I go with, it will depend on how big of a MOSFET I need and where I run my leads out and all those things. So we're going to hope this survives the test, and I'm going to explain to you kind of what the setup is that I have in here. If you're not familiar, these cages are Aurora cages from Open Flywheel Project. They are a polycarbonate cage, which is, I think, a really nice option for this blaster. You do have to modify the shell slightly, but it's really easy and you won't really notice it at all. You just have to take out this support at the bottom left screw port here on each one. So you just have to kind of carve that away and then it should fit right in, no problem. Now obviously you do also have to modify the cage itself, as it has this long dart guide here and it has a dart guide in. So you'll have to remove the dart guide in off the second and third stage and the dart guide out off the first and second stage. And unless you just run two stages, obviously. So right now I have this dart guide still here because we're just testing two stages first, and I've cut this one back with a Dremel. I've run quite a few darts through this system already to build up some foam, so we should get some really nice numbers right off the bat. So also I'll be running cyclone wheels in this system, obviously, and that will be for all three stages once we get there. But let's go ahead and talk about the motors, because setting up your motors properly for a three-stage setup or a two-stage setup is very important. And it's really all about RPMs, as you want RPMs to increase from your first to second stage and then from your second to third stage. So we will be running these motors off of a 3S Lipo and a very beefy one. But first stage is going to be our out of darts Krakens, and those are 35,000 RPM motors, which is a pretty high first stage motor. A very nice RPM for a first stage. So that is a great, if you just want to run a single stage, that's a great motor to go with. And then for our second stage, we have the Neo worker motors, and these motors are kind of a tweener motor. They are really high RPMs for a first stage, but these are actually probably a great second stage motor, as they are a 43,000 RPM motor. I think that's a great second stage motor, and we will test it to find out. Now I won't be testing different motors, as that would be silly expensive, as this is already an expensive enough build. Obviously these cages run about $20 a piece. The cyclone wheels run $18 a piece or a pair, so that would be $120 or just under that. I mean, with shipping, probably about $120 just for cages and flywheels. And then you add the motors on top of that, and yeah, it gets really pricey. So that's something else you have to think about when building a blaster like this. So when we move on to the third stage, I'm going to be going with the Fang revamps running on 3S, and those I think are like 55,500 RPMs on 3S. So that will be even higher than the worker motors, and that will give us that nice almost 10,000 RPM boost each stage. So pretty darn good setup, I think, for testing. I am curious if anybody else uses a different setup, what kind of numbers they're getting and consistency, but that's what we're going to test today, and those are the motors we are going to use. So first, let's go ahead and test the single stage, and I'll show you the numbers as I'm talking. So we're using brand new AccuFake darts for this test, and I am doing a shoot of 30, and then I'll take out the high and the low. And for the single stage setup, we got an average of 129 FPS. So just under 130, pretty good numbers from a single stage flywheel system, especially when it has to go through, like I said, that much faux barrel. So pretty happy with those numbers. And I'm doing this test indoors because I wanted to take out as many variables as possible, because we are doing this test actually over several days, obviously. So I think that will help us get a more accurate comparison of all the stages. So we'll move on to a two-stage setup, and that will be with them close together. So they will be just like this. And this is pretty cool because when the dart actually goes in here, it will be contacted here and then also contacted there before exiting out. So that's pretty neat, and it'll be interesting to compare this to when we move this setup further forward here and we have a gap in between, to see if that gives us more power with a little more faux barrel at the end, or if we get more power when we move it forward and have faux barrel in between and a little less at the end. So we'll go ahead and test the dual stage setup. So testing of the two stage next to each other setup was pretty nice. We got fairly consistent numbers, in my opinion, from a dual stage flywheel setup, and after taking out the low and the high, we got an average of 170 FPS. So that's quite a bit of a boost over the 130 we got from the single stage, and I think that's pretty darn nice performance out of that two-stage setup. Now, we are also going to talk about dartware, and I'll go ahead and show you this firing outdoors and show you kind of how accurate it is. But if you can't really tell from the video, it hit Zombie Strike Man almost every time, and when it didn't, I probably missed over it purposely just to kind of see the dart flying a little bit further. Now, I was very happy with how consistent that was when it's set up in this fashion, and we will compare that obviously to when we go to two-stage setup when they're further apart here in a second, and you can kind of see the difference. Also, I had absolutely no dart heads fly off when I was shooting this outdoors. When I was testing indoors, dart heads did fly off, but that was because I was shooting into a wall that was pretty close to where the chronograph was sitting. So when you shoot something that high powered into a wall, dart heads are going to come off. Alright, so now we're going to test with a setup similar to this. Now I obviously have my connections connected, and then I took some electrical tape and secured the faux barrel to the dart guide that I cut down, just to make sure that doesn't go anywhere and it's lined up correctly. Now obviously if I was to choose this setup, I'd be curious to see how much better or worse it did if you didn't cut down the first stage dart guide and then it would go through a little less faux barrel. Obviously if I put this permanent, I would try to make this a little longer so it was locked in there permanently and wouldn't wobble in, and you wouldn't really have to use any sort of tape or anything to secure that on. Honestly, I didn't want to cut faux barrel just for this project, and this is a piece I already had, and it was good enough to work. So we'll go ahead and look at those numbers. So as you can probably tell, those numbers, we're getting a lot of variety there. So some are really high and actually higher numbers than when we had them close together, but also some are quite a bit lower. And when we've tested all 30 darts, taking out the high and the low, we get an average of 158 FPS. So not bad, but obviously not as good as the 170 we got when they were close together. And then when I took this outside and fired it against Zombie Strike Man and shooting darts over a longer range than through my chronograph, I could tell there was a lot less accuracy, which was a little bit surprising, and obviously some darts flew further than others because of that inconsistency in FPS. Not saying that this is a bad setup, I just probably prefer them next to each other and then having a little bit more faux barrel at the end. That just seemed to be a little bit more consistent than this. So for me, the two-stage setup winner is them close together rather than far apart. I did not incur any jams while testing this and had no jamming or anything issues there, and was pretty happy with both setups in terms of consistency, in terms of that. No heads flew off outdoors during my testing. Obviously they did indoors because I was shooting them against a wall or whatever, and then you're going to lose heads. Now I'm not saying that this is not hard on darts. It is going to be harder on darts than a single stage flywheel setup, obviously. But that being said, I don't think it's super hard on darts, and those AccuFake darts, the heads can fly off kind of, no matter what, just depending on how well they're glued on. So in terms of dart wear, I'm very happy with these two setups. I don't think there's any issues there. Now, the problem with 3S with this setup is there is no room for a battery that will power this safely in the battery tray. So we'll remove these and I'll show you that. So this is the expanded battery door Worker gives you with this blaster, and not even the battery that we used for the two-stage setups will fit with that battery door. So we'll remove this, and this fits in there actually really nicely, and this is the same battery I used when I did my Sub-Zero build. It is a big enough battery to be able to hold up with the two-stage flywheel setup with the motors I was using. Now obviously what motors you choose will depend on how big your battery needs to be, but to get a good two-stage setup and run it on a battery much smaller than this, I would be surprised. And this one fits in there very nicely. All somebody needs to do is design a 3D printed door for this blaster that will go around this guy. But that shouldn't be too hard to do, unfortunately, unless Worker sees this video, which I hope they do, and sees that we would like to have a little bit, actually quite a bit larger door, expanded battery door than the one they give, at least as an option, just to buy separate. I think that would be very, very nice. So then it would continue with the look of the transparent blue or clear, whatever one you choose, because a 3D printed door is obviously not going to look quite as nice. But this battery could work with a 3D printed door. But when we go to 3-stage, we're going to need a much bigger lipo. And this 2.2 graphene 3S lipo with also 65C 130 burst discharge will be big enough, because when we add those Fang revamps, those pull some serious amperage, and we are over 200 amps with this setup. But this is just barely big enough to power all 6 of those motors. So that being said, this is way too big to fit into this battery door. Well, not way too big, but it is too big. It will not fit. It is too long. And it might fit in the stock. If you want to modify this stock to hold this lipo, you probably can do that. I've seen several people do that. Jotocast, I think, was the first one really to do that, and then people have made even 3D printed stocks, I believe, that actually already have that compartment in there and whatnot. But pretty nice idea, and that is definitely an option. So you can run your wires in through the middle of the stock there and connect through there. But that is obviously cutting into your stock, so you basically made this stock only usable with this blaster, or not necessarily, but it won't look as nice, obviously. And then you have to cut through the attachment point of your blaster, so you just have to make a lot of modifications and cuts to a transparent shell, and the more you do that, the worse it really is going to look. So you kind of have to make that choice. Alright, so we have the 3-stage setup set up. So let's go ahead and take a look at that chronograph data. Now, I went ahead and put some shots through this prior to doing the chronograph testing to build up a little foam on that third flywheel setup, and went ahead and actually did the outdoor segment prior to doing the indoor segment of the chronograph to even build up more foam. So we had quite a few shots through this, but I didn't really put more than probably 100 or so, but that's about the same as what I did originally with the first 2 sets of flywheels. But obviously they've built up a little bit more foam through testing, but I didn't want to do too many shots because I didn't want to push my luck with the 21 amp switch blowing out. So as you can see from the chronograph data, we are getting higher numbers, but the average ended up being 181 FPS, which is about 40% better than the 1-stage setup. And the testing that we did when we did the 2-stage setup that I liked the best with them close together, that was about 32% better than the single stage setup. So I'm not sure that's enough of a gain to warrant the extra money, the extra hassle of modifying the blaster to be able to hold a much bigger lipo. I mean, there's a lot of things that you have to do differently to run a 3rd stage than just run 2 stages. And I'll go ahead and show you the outdoor firing of the 3-stage setup. And I also noticed, which was a little strange and a little unexpected, that we were not getting nearly as accurate of shots with the 3-stage setup as we were with the 2-stage setup. I was getting very, very accurate shots when I was just running the 2 stages next to each other. I'm very happy with that. When I ran 3 stages, I guess the FPS went up enough that the darts just were not quite as stable at that high of FPS. So that's another thing to consider when you're running 3 stages. The accuracy is going to go down, and is the gain of a few, like 10 FPS, good enough to warrant that loss in accuracy? You know, all these things piled upon each other with the lack of accuracy, the higher costs with the 3rd stage flywheel setup, the added modifications as you will need to find a new place to house the lipo, probably the stock or another stock, running probably a dual MOSFET system, because this is going to be pulling over 200 amps. I mean, obviously, I guess you could find a MOSFET that can handle, you know, whatever that stall amperage that you need and just use one. But I mean, it's a lot of amps, and if you guys are gonna run a 2-stage or 3-stage system, I highly recommend checking out SUILD.com. That's SUILD.com. They have lots of really good info, and I highly recommend that website. I will link it in the description box. They will tell you if your lipo is big enough to power the motors that you're trying to run it through at the voltage that you're trying to run it through. So highly recommend that. So when it comes to dart wear with the 3-stage setup, I honestly think it did very well. I had one dart head fly off, but you know, with AccuFakes, that could really happen no matter what the system it goes through. So I'm not going to say that that's necessarily because it went through a 3-stage and not just a 2-stage. But I mean, even the wear on the foam really isn't bad. And honestly, dart wear is going to really depend on obviously what cages you use and especially what flywheels you use. So if you decide to use like a worker, serrated wheel, then you're probably going to get a lot more dart wear. And that is actually one of the main reasons why I decided to go with cyclone wheels, a smooth flywheel, is because I didn't want quite as much dart wear because it was going through a multi-stage system. So can't really say that dart wear is a problem no matter what the stage, 2-stage or 3-stage. So I think that's good news. I hope this information was helpful to you. I probably will be doing a full build video on this when I go ahead and wire it up for MOSFETs, and I might even do some simple paint job on this, as it's a lot of transparent blue and I kind of want to break that up a little bit, but that probably won't happen until the weather gets a little warmer. But I want to thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to smash that like button. It would really help out the channel. Share this video with anybody you think would be interested and helped by this video. I would greatly appreciate it. Obviously, I spent a ton of time on this video and a ton of money, but I honestly did it all for you guys and for myself. I wanted to know the information myself, but for me, I really like that 2-stage setup next to each other better than the 3, and just weighing all the pros and cons of that, I just prefer that. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Let me know if this was helpful. I would greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not subscribed. And as always, guys, peace out.